Welcome to Passion for Sound, the channel dedicated to thorough and honest reviews of headphones, earphones, DACs, headphone amps, other components and accessories. Basically everything audio related except power amps and passive speakers. My name's Lachlan and my goal is to explore and discuss all kinds of audio topics, even the controversial ones, to help us all find more enjoyment from music. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. And today, thanks to channel patron Barbs, also known as Paul, we've got a review of the Clark Audio Aeon 2 Closed. These are an amazing headphone. They fit in this tiny little carry case here, but they're a full-sized, closed-back headphone, perfect for portable use, but also desktop use as well. You might also be wondering why I've got this little scattering of bits and pieces on my desk, and that's because there are many different ways to tune and hear the sound out of the Aeon 2 Closed, and that's what these are all about. I'll explain shortly, so now let's get into the review and check out the Aeon 2 Closed. The Aeons retail for $899 US, regardless of whether they're the closed or the open variety. As I said, I'm reviewing the closed ones, so I can't comment on the sound of the opens, but the pricing is the same regardless. Strangely, for those of us here in Australia, the pricing is around 1,595 Australian dollars, which is on its way to twice the price of the US dollar amount. I don't fully understand that. It's not uncommon that we see a bit more expense here in Australia compared to the US dollar, but that's a bit extreme and I don't fully understand it. I've tried to look at this review in the context of the US dollar pricing only, but I can't help be swayed a little bit by the cost of them here in Australia and therefore where it sets my expectations for these. But as I said, I'll try to keep it to the US dollar pricing, and I've got a comparison with the fairly similarly priced Beyerdynamic T5 3rd Gen coming up a bit later. For now though, let's talk about the design, the accessories and the features of the Aeon 2. Inside this tiny little carry case, you'll see that there's an amazingly compact folding system used for the Aeon 2s. So that's them, full-sized, closed-back headphones in a tiny, tiny little package. Now to undo that, all you need to do is flip the headband up, like so, and you've got yourself a normal headphone. It's a pretty ingenious mechanism. It feels really sturdy and solid, but it also makes the headphones so compact and also comfortable. So there's this sliding leather headband here that moves up and down these twin rails, and that allows you to get a really comfortable sit on the head with the right amount of pressure, and the leather headband is nice and soft, so it takes the pressure nice and evenly across the head. All in all, they're a beautifully made, really comfortable headphone that's constructed out of a combination of carbon fiber for the baffles, aluminium, leather for the headband, and apparently some titanium too. I'm not sure which parts are which in terms of the titanium and the aluminium. The point being though, it's metal and carbon fiber for all of the structural pieces, and that's fantastic. That means they're light, but they're also very, very strong and very, very durable. So to this point, I'm loving everything about the Aeon 2 Closed. They look great, they feel great, they're well made, they're compact when they fold up. The next question is about the cable. Now the cable attaches to these little custom connectors on the bottom. They're a 4-pin connector, and whilst not proprietary to Clark Audio as far as I understand, they aren't the most common connector. So aftermarket cables will have to be specially made for these, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Looking at the cable, which I've got hidden because I can't keep it nicely coiled up, it's a really nice, supple, sort of rubbery sheathed cable. It's got those connectors on each end, which by the way I really like because they lock in place very quickly and very easily, and they're secure. They're also not large and bulky like some other custom connectors, so in that regard I really like it. The cable's terminated at this end in a 3.5mm plug with adapter, so screw-on adapter there. And all in all, I'd say the cable is quality, it's a good length, everything about it's just fine. My only complaint with it is that it doesn't coil up well. So when I've taken the time to really carefully roll it like this, although that wasn't that careful, and then you put it down on a desk somewhere, it's going to make a fool of me and sit really nicely. Beforehand, I rolled it up much more carefully the way I normally would coil cables, and it wanted to spring apart. So that's a minor drawback, but realistically, you're going to coil it up, you're going to pop it in the case, and then you're going to uncoil it at the other end and use it. So it's not a big deal, and the cable feels nice and seems to be high quality. That's all you can really ask for. Before we get to talking about the sound quality, I just want to talk about some of the internal technologies in the design, what sort of drivers are being used, and how easy or hard it is to drive. Dan Clark Audio don't post any resistance or sensitivity figures, so I can't share those with you. I can't share specific power figures to reach certain volumes either, but what I can tell you is they're a planar magnetic driver that does take a bit of juice to drive. They're not a particularly efficient driver. To put that into context, I used these on the Hugo TT2 and the volume setting was about -26. In contrast, the Beyerdynamic T5 3rd generation was sitting at only -38 on the TT2. That's a jump of about 12 decibels or about 4 times the power to drive the Aeon 2s compared to the T5s. Now the T5s are very efficient, very easy to drive headphones, but at the same time it shows you that the Aeon 2s need a little bit of juice, but at the same time they're not crazy. I also hooked them up to the Earman Eagle, which has a modest maximum of 62 milliwatts into 32 ohms, and it was still able to comfortably and with quality drive the Aeon 2s. The volume range was around 75 to 80% for comfortable listening, but if I started pushing towards maximum, things did get very uncomfortable in terms of volume. So it did have enough power for general listening purposes with the Aeon 2s, and that says to me that whilst they're a little bit more demanding than some of the very sensitive headphones on the market, they're also not in the realm of some of the crazy inefficient headphones that are floating around out there. Coming back now to the drivers in the Aeon 2s, as I said, they're a planar magnetic driver and they use a couple of special technologies unique to Dan Clark Audio. The drivers themselves are made for Dan Clark Audio or even by them, I'm not entirely sure where they're made, but they're not an off-the-shelf, and that's the key point here. They're not an off-the-shelf driver like the Fostex drivers where Dan Clark Audio made their name as Mr. Speakers. They've moved on from that and these days are having the drivers made for them or by them with specific design pieces built in there. One such piece of technology is what they call TrueFlow, and from what I can understand looking on the Dan Clark website, it's a little bit similar to the phaser technology used by Odyssey and also probably similar to the stealth magnet designed by Hyphaman. I'm not saying they're the same, but the intent is the same in that they're trying to keep the magnets that are sitting on either side of the diaphragm of the planar magnetic driver, they're trying to keep those magnets from interrupting the smooth airflow of the sound wave from the driver surface into your ears. So that's the key point of those. The other thing that's built in there is what they call V-planar technology. The idea of that is very small grooves or V-shaped corrugations, I guess you could call them, in the surface of the driver itself. The theory is that that's going to improve stability, possibly rigidity, so they talk about stability, but I'm assuming that translates to rigidity of the driver diaphragm, and that then means better bass quality according to the Dan Clark Audio literature. So there's some custom technologies going in here, there's some beautiful design and some clear thought being put into how to make these headphones as good as possible. And overall, I'd have to say the proof is in the pudding because they do sound great, but there's lots of variations because of all these pieces I've got in front of me. So let's now step through and talk about the sound quality. Enjoying this video? If you are and you'd like to help me make more videos like this one, there are lots of ways you can help and most of them don't cost you a cent. You can help for free by liking this video, subscribing and ringing the bell, sharing this video on social media or your favourite audio forums, or by making your next purchases using any of the affiliate links in the description. Obviously that's not technically free, but you're not spending anything extra and it all helps out. Want to go a step further? You could buy some merchandise, t-shirt, hoodies, caps and the like, or you can join the Passion for Sound family on Patreon. It's a growing community with plenty of interesting discussion and your chance to influence what happens on the channel. Check out the description for more information and links where relevant. But for now, let's get back to the video. When you get a pair of Aeon 2s, they come with a range of options available. First and foremost, you can use no damping, which is what I've got in here at the moment, or you can add into them a range of different damping options provided by Dan Clark Audio as standard. They range from the least damping basic foam, which you can pretty much see through, to then moving to a fairly rigid black felt, so it's got quite a cardboardy sort of feel to it, and then going to a thicker but softer, interestingly enough, white felt. So each of those is meant to bring a different level of damping, and as you'll see from the graph on screen, they do change the sound signature fairly significantly, particularly in the case of the white foam. Moving from no damping to the foam to the black felt is not as huge of a change as jumping to the white felt. The white felt makes a big difference to the treble, and as I'll talk about shortly, each of these kind of has its pros and cons. So I'm going to start by telling you what the sound is like as a baseline with no damping at all, and then step through each of these damping materials and tell you what changes when you switch to each different material. So starting with the undamped Aeon 2 closed. It's a very clean sound is the first thing I noticed. There's really good treble extension, there's good bass extension, but overall my attention was drawn more to the treble than to the bass. What I found was that because my attention was drawn to the treble, mid-range content tends to sound a little bit breathy and a little bit emphasized up the top end. On male vocals and similar frequency instruments, the sound quality is very natural and very true, but as you move up in the frequency range towards the upper end of the mid-range, say female vocals and similar instruments, then you start to notice that you're more hearing kind of the breathiness and the texture of those instruments and voices more so than the actual tonal qualities, if that makes sense. To me, it just doesn't always sound quite right when you listen without the damping. The good news is the overall sound is very clean and very resolving with lots and lots of detail, but no harshness or edginess to the sound. So it's a really good baseline platform to build on once you start adding these different damping materials. Finally, I should mention Soundstage is just okay. Without the damping in, there's got decent width to it, it's got a little bit of depth and a little bit of space and layering, but it's not spectacular. Because Soundstage cues are so reliant on the different frequencies we can and can't hear due to effects like masking and the like, where louder frequencies cover up softer frequencies, it's going to change the soundstaging characteristics as we move through these materials. So don't think that just because with no damping the soundstage is average, that's the end of the story. Things are about to change. And with that in mind, let's start talking now about the least damping material, being the foam. Adding in the foams to the Aeon 2s just shifts the treble emphasis down a little bit. So some of the peaks, as you'll see in the graph, some of the peaks that happen higher up with no damping shift down a little bit with the damping. What that did was it improved the overall tonal characteristics of the sound, but I did find at times it became a little tiny bit fatiguing because of where some of those peaks landed. It does, however, also improve the sound staging and give a much better sense of spatial information from the Aeon 2s. For those of you looking for a good sound staging closed back headphone, the Aeon 2 with the foams might be a really good choice as long as you're not overly sensitive to treble, because as I said, a couple of the peaks in the treble with the foam damping material installed were just a little bit harsh for my ears. Maybe harsh, a little bit strong. They were in positions within the frequency range that made it a little bit fatiguing for me on extended listening and on certain tracks. Other than those changes that I've just described though, very little change to my ears when using the foams compared to no damping. So from there, I moved on to the next most damping material, being the black felt. The black felt brings a more intimate presentation with quite a bit more bass compared to the non-damped or the foam versions. It doesn't turn them into a bass monster headphone, but it's definitely a warmer and richer sound. That's part of the reason why the soundstage also shrinks slightly, but there's still a decent sense of space, and I probably prefer the soundstage from the black felt to the non-damped soundstage with the Aeon 2s in the raw. The black felt removes a little bit of the sense of sparkle and clarity from the treble, but not in a bad way. It doesn't make things muddy or thick or rolled off. It just helps to tame a little bit of that treble emphasis that, whilst beautifully rendered, might be a bit distracting and tilt the sound signature a little bit too much into the treble direction. The blacks probably bring it back a little bit too far towards bass for somebody wanting true neutral, but that's also where the foam material can come in. So if you're looking for a more neutral presentation, I think the foam's the answer. If you're looking to smooth off that treble a little bit, maybe get slightly better tonal quality through the mids, I think the black felt is probably the way to go. I'd describe the overall presentation from the black felt as a well-balanced but slightly warm sound signature. In my ongoing listening to these, and I'll give you some specific track examples shortly, the black felt drew me in more so than the other damping materials, I'd say. But as I said, I'll give you some specific track examples in a moment to really explain this with a bit more detail. First, let's talk about the final damping material being the white felt. The white felt makes a really significant shift in the frequency response. It's the most impactful of the lot in terms of the significance of the change, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best. As you'd expect from the graph I'm showing on screen now, the white felt does make these sound a lot warmer and a lot thicker sounding. But again, you're not losing heaps of detail, you're just changing the points of emphasis, and therefore you've still got good resolution, but in a much warmer sounding headphone now. What the white felt does well is it brings the mid-range forward in the mix, and it's something that really balances off nicely against what I described with the zero damping and with the foam damping. Not quite as much compared to the black felt, which does start to bring a bit more weight to the mids, but the white does that best of all. So if you're looking for a good mid-range focused headphone that still has good extension to the bass and the treble and doesn't lose out on detail, the Aeon 2 closed with the white felt is also a really good option. And that's why I said at the beginning, there's so many different ways you can listen to the Aeon 2 closed that you can adjust it based on your mood, what you're listening to, the devices you're pairing it with. There's lots of flexibility here, and I think that's really cool. To put this more into context though overall, let's talk about some specific track examples that you can go listen to and see what I might mean. The first track I want to talk about is In Your Eyes by Peter Gabriel on the New Blood album. Now this album is an orchestral take on some of Peter Gabriel's most popular tracks, so it's a great way to hear a really good recording of orchestras. What I noticed listening to the Aeon 2 closed was that to get the right sense of bite and clarity from the strings, I was preferring the zero damping option. Having no damping helped to bring a bit of extra bite and clarity and attack to the strings that helped the overall sense of energy in the recording. It's a great recording to start with, and it sounded good with any of the damping materials installed, but I really enjoyed it with no damping at all. In contrast though, I moved over to Loan Me a Dime by Boz Scaggs. Now this is an older recording, not a particularly good recording, but a great blues track. And what I found as I moved through some different materials is that I liked what the white felt brought to the table in terms of its smoother presentation, but I did feel like I was losing a bit of the detail that I wanted because the recording doesn't start particularly detailed in the first place. So after playing around a little bit, I actually landed on the foam being the best choice for this particular recording. And so now you're probably starting to see that there's a little bit of a challenge with the Aeon 2s, and that is finding which material you're happy to sit with and stay with when each of them seems to work well for different recordings and different playback devices potentially. To round off these examples, I tried one more track, which was Horse by Skunk Hour. Now Skunk Hour is an Aussie band, many of you may not have heard of it, but it is on Tidal if you want to check it out. While listening to Horse, what I found was that the treble coming through with the foams or no damping at all was just a little bit too harsh on this particular recording. Again, it's not that the treble from the Aeon 2s themselves are harsh, it's that if there's some harshness in the recording, the level of treble coming through with the undamped or the foam material is just a little bit too much if it's going to be showing you what's bad about the recording. Hopefully that makes sense. The quality of the treble in isolation from the Aeon 2 closed is fantastic, but it is very revealing of what's going wrong in the recording if you don't have the right damping installed. At the other end of the spectrum, I found the white felt took too much energy out of the music and left it sounding a little bit flat, and so I landed on the black felts, which was a nice balance between the two. It did come at the cost of a reduced soundstage size, but the sense of space between individual instruments was still quite good, and it was overall a more enjoyable listen. So having been through 3 different specific tracks, what I found was that I chose 3 different damping solutions. Having listened more and more, where I would land personally for these in the long term is I would probably install the black felt and stay with it. You're losing some soundstage size by doing so, but I think it's the best compromise for a range of different music and sources and listening situations. The good news is that whilst you're trading off a bit of soundstage size, the image focus is still excellent, there's a decent amount of space between instruments, and the tonal quality, particularly through the mid-range where the foam and the undamped versions can be a little bit off sometimes, the tonal qualities of the black felt are really, really nice. So let's wrap all this up now with a couple of specific comparisons. The first headphone I thought to put this up against was the Beyerdynamic T5 3rd Gen, which is currently my favourite closed-back headphone. I don't do a lot of closed-back listening, but once I heard the T5 3rd Gens when I reviewed them here on the channel, I absolutely had to have a pair for myself because I just loved their sense of clarity, and not clarity in the sense of treble production, so much as an overall sense of ability to see into the music and feel like there's lots of space and every instrument's being delivered in a pure way. And that's strange because they've got quite a wonky frequency response when you look at the measurements, but they just do something that I love with the way they present the music. So I put them up against the Aeon 2 closed to see how they fared. For these comparisons, I was using the black felt in the Aeon 2 closed as my preferred version of their sound. So rather than complicating things and comparing each different damping material with the T5s, I just stuck with what I thought was the best option on the Aeon 2 closed up against a headphone that I love without any modifications. And what I heard was that the T5 is a little bit more forward in the mids compared to the Aeon 2 closed with the black felt. Now obviously it would have been a different story if I'd tried the other damping materials, but the forwardness in the upper mids of the T5 is still less than either the foam or the undamped version of the Aeon 2 closed. So what I think is happening here is the T5 is hitting the right balance for me of forwardness in the mids, whereas the Aeon 2 jumps from either side of it. It's either gone too forward in the mids with the foam or no damping, or it goes just a little bit shy of the ideal when using either of the felt pads. It's a relatively minor difference, and I wouldn't say that I prefer the T5 definitively in all cases, but there's clearly a difference, so I wanted to mention it. I did find that the Aeon 2 closed sounded just a little bit more coherent across the whole frequency response, and that's probably because it doesn't have those kind of crazy looking peaks and troughs that the T5 has, which work incredibly well sometimes, but do occasionally bring it undone. The Aeon 2 closed is much more intimate compared to the T5's massive sense of soundstage for closed back, but at the same time, that intimacy does bring a sense of coherency and togetherness, so everything feels like it's one recording, whereas the T5 can sometimes kind of throw things apart a little bit too much. One of the tracks I tried when listening to these two was Blackberry by the Black Crows. The T5 did a wonderful job at separating sounds in the soundstage and giving me a really good sense of texture and clarity from each of those instruments. On the other hand, the Aeon 2 closed did sound a bit more closed in, but everything stuck together better, and overall the tonal qualities I think were slightly more true to life from the Aeon 2 closed. So on that particular track, and using the black felt on the Aeon 2s, I would lean that way slightly in terms of overall realism and coherency of the music. Ultimately, both of these headphones I think are fantastic if you're looking for fun and interesting and a bit of an experience with your listening to closed backs, then the T5s are a great choice. If you're looking for more truth to life and the ability to adjust a little bit, then you'd choose the Aeon 2 closed every time. So at this point I was going to wrap things up, but I thought I might just try the Aeon 2 closed up against the AudioQuest NightOwls. Now the NightOwls and the Nighthawks are no longer being made, which is a real shame, but they're still one of the better closed backs I've listened to. And I happen to still own them, so I thought let's give it a try for anyone that's heard the NightOwls, maybe has the NightOwls, and is thinking about the Aeon 2 closed. For this test, one of the tracks that came on was Shadow Days by John Mayer, and while listening to both headphones, the NightOwls came across rich and warm with a beautiful focus on the vocals. The Aeon 2 closed is more similar to the NightOwls than it was to the T5s, but at the same time, didn't sound quite as natural and had a little bit too much emphasis on the upper mids with John Mayer's vocals. So as you're probably gathering by now, a lot of the separation between these different headphones and indeed the different damping materials with the Aeon 2s comes down to how it presents the mid-range. Bass and treble are all pretty consistently solid across the board, but the mid-range tonality does vary a little bit, and that's the separation point for me. Overall, I thought the NightOwl did everything just a little bit better on this particular track than the Aeon 2 closed did, so I thought I'd try another track as a contrast, and this time it was Future 86 by Turquoise. This isn't a fantastic recording, but it's good enough, and again, it's always interesting to see what headphones do with slightly imperfect recordings. On this track, I found the NightOwls came across as being maybe a little bit too thick in the sound, whereas the Aeon 2 had a slightly more open presentation to it. Having said that, as listening went on, things got a little bit too bright up top in the treble from the Aeon 2s, and so I flipped over to the white felt to see if that would improve it. The white felt did improve it in some ways, but it also lost some of the clarity and realism that I was enjoying from the NightOwls, and I ended up describing it in my notes as being like a disembodied version of the NightOwls. Now what I mean by that is that some of the mid-range weight and clarity was sort of sucked out by moving to the white felts, and it left the overall recording sounding like there was treble and there was bass and a little bit of a hole in the middle that didn't bring everything together and give it the sense of weight and presence that it needed. So ultimately, I think what this has shown me is that the NightOwls still are a fantastic closeback. Also, the T5s are still a great closeback as long as you're happy to have a slight alteration to the sound and enjoy what they're doing to the sound like its own custom EQ. But it's also shown me that the Aeon 2 closed are very, very good, whilst perhaps being slightly imperfect. And let me explain what I mean by that by way of a conclusion here. The Aeon 2 closed are one of the best designed headphones I've ever seen. They're comfortable, they look great, the foldability factor is just incredible. So I think in that regard, there's nothing I can complain about in terms of the fit and the feel and the function. When we move to sound though, things get a little bit different. Because whilst they're definitely one of the best closebacks in that price range, maybe the best closeback overall, but they're still not perfect because each of the tunings that they have are good, but none of them are quite perfect. It's like if there's a bullseye right in the middle here, each of the different tunings comes really close to it. It's like in the ring that surrounds the bullseye dot. None of them quite hit that bullseye though for me. On some tracks, no damping is fantastic. On another track, the foam's great. On another track, you'll go to the black felt, and then you might decide that you need a little bit less treble, but you go to the white felt and it takes it a bit too far. So whilst all of them are very listenable and very, very good, I never landed on a tuning that I thought was perfect and I was happy to leave as it was. It left me kind of a little bit unstable, I guess you could say, where I was constantly listening thinking, I wonder if this would be better with such and such a tuning. And so that for me is probably the one drawback. I think personally I would have preferred to see a headphone that Dan Clark Audio had meticulously tuned to exactly how they wanted it to sound and didn't give us the damping pads. Now I know some of you out there are going to love the fact that you can tweak and tune, and no doubt there's modifications you can do where you adjust the provided pads or you cut some of your own from different materials, and that's absolutely fantastic. Having not done that and just focused on the stock setup, I think that maybe having the choice is a bad thing because it leads us to question, have I got the right tuning in place for this particular track? At the same time, I wonder if any of these are exactly what Dan Clark Audio were aiming for, or if all of them are just different variations of tunings, in which case I wonder what their perfect ideal tuning would actually be. Now don't let any of these musings from me here at the end put you off these headphones. They're a fantastic headphone. They're one of the best closed headphones you can buy for the price, particularly if you're talking US dollars. But at the same time, I just want to flag that they're not 100% perfect, and I do think that's important to take into account. They're very, very good. They're absolutely worth $899 US dollars. I'm not so sure if they're worth 1,600 Australian dollars. That's a bit of a stretch potentially, but they're very good. They are unparalleled in their ability to fold up nice and compact like this. That is just amazing. And so if you need a traveling pair of closed headphones, these are absolutely what you should choose. If you don't need to travel and you just need something closed for the office environment or to isolate external noise, then you might want to consider different options based on what I've said and see what else is around. But these should be in your shortlist because they're absolutely fantastic, even if they're not quite perfect in every single version. I hope this review has been useful to you. Hopefully I haven't confused you and put you off the Aeon 2 closed, because they're a brilliant headphone. If you found this review useful, please think about subscribing, and please do hit the like button. It really helps the channel to grow and to share more videos with you and people like you. For now though, I'll leave you to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.